Welcome to How They Do That. I'm your host, Skot Waldron, and here is a little preview of what you're going to hear today.
If you don't actually believe in what you're saying, the audience will sniff that out in 30 seconds. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's really just a very simple 3-part structure, or you could think about the 3-act play or the 3-act screenplay. And it boils down to 3 things. How do you as the speaker disrupt that world and introduce people, reorient them into a world of what could be, and then bring them to a place where now you're saying, okay, what would be the results of this world?
Have you ever wondered, how am I going to make this talk so impactful that people remember me? People want to engage with me. People want to ask me about what I do for them on an ongoing basis. I know I've thought that every time I give a talk. I am trying to, yes, impact the people in the room for that moment. I want them to apply what I teach, but I also want them to be inspired. I want them to be engaged, because that is what's going to build lasting change and the ideas of their minds, and maybe shift just that one little thing. I want them to have one little aha moment. Michael Hidalgo is going to be on the show to give us a framework that he uses and has used for over 25 years to speak to tens of thousands of people across the world. And this framework is so simple, but it makes sense. We are storytelling machines. Our brains are storytelling machines. We want to complete stories. We want to start, end stories. We like them. We like a little bit of the friction. The friction has to be there so that we're engaged. Michael's going to introduce us to what that is called and how we use that to build more engagement in our talks. Michael, he has been more than 25 years leading multiple organizations. He's worked with leaders and teams to discover, understand, and navigate through problems, optimize performance, create sustainable growth. He's a sought after speaker. He's a retreat leader. He's an author. He's also an associate of Giant London and a certified life intensive coach. And he lives in Denver. He has built some awesome stuff. And I've loved talking to Michael, getting to know him better. We've known each other about a year now, and his brain is awesome. I hope you're going to enjoy this. Here we go. Michael, here we are, dude. We are going to talk about the world of keynoting, because you know just a little bit about that.
Mm-hmm. Sure do.
Yeah, a lot about that actually. So let's hit on that. You've spoken to tens of thousands of people. I'm not exaggerating, right? You've been doing this for a long time, and you've spoken to a lot of people about a lot of things. Like, what are some of the things you've talked to people about?
Yeah, well, I've been a pastor for 25 years, and I'm currently transitioning out of that role into performance coaching, because in a lot of ways I've recognized that I can use the same gifts and skills that I've both been given and honed over the years to move into a new space. So I've spoken a lot about spirituality, Jesus, the Bible, but I've also spoken about malaria advocacy and policy. I've spoken about working together across real religious and political difference. I've talked about work-life balance, leadership health. I mean, the list is pretty long. So had the opportunity to be in a lot of places and speak to a lot of people.
Okay, so you've developed a framework in order to do this, because I sit there and I go, all right, so I know this thing, and so I'm going to speak on this thing that I'm really comfortable with, but you've been able to speak on, everything from Jesus to malaria. And I would assume you're not a malaria expert necessarily. You didn't go to school for malaria studies, and
No.
but you've been able to craft a keynote around these ideas using a specific framework. I've heard you teach this framework, and that's why you're on the show, because it's so brilliant. So I want to understand how we as coaches can learn from you what we can do to be better if we are wanting to do, I would assume a lot of us are wanting to do something like this at some point. And how do we get better at it? How do we use this framework to help build better keynotes?
Yeah. Well, the framework, by the way, comes from I went to film school in the distant past, and I actually focused on screenwriting. And I realized that every story has a really good structure supporting it. And the number one question I'm asked by people who are keynoting, speaking, teaching, lecturing is, how do I structure a talk? And I began to realize, as human beings, we're storytelling creatures. And if the story has a structure that works in screenwriting, I began to think maybe it has a structure that could help in, well, for anything from a sermon to a keynote to a talk. And so that's really where it comes from. And it's a pretty simple structure. And if you are listening and you think about your favorite film, you'll begin seeing it. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's really just a very simple 3-part structure, where you could think about the 3-act play or the 3-act screenplay. And it boils down to 3 things. It's really, as the scholar, education scholar Jack Mesereau says, it's about orientation, disorientation, and reorientation. Meaning, you have a world you're familiar with, then how do you as the speaker disrupt that world and introduce people, reorient them into a world of what could be, and then bring them to a place where now you're saying, okay, what would be the results of this world? And so really the 3-act structure is, I'll give you an example. I was speaking with a vice president who had to go speak about onboarding new clients. And they had created a software that was really going to make this seamless. He was getting ready to go speak to a room full of people about this very thing. And he asked me, he actually said, it's really boring. And I said, well, what's the biggest problem, or what's the reality right now in onboarding new clients in your industry? He's in tech. And so he told me about it. And I said, what is your solution going to bring? And that's actually where he lit up and began talking about that. And I said, what would life look like on the other side of that? And he said, oh, well, we'll overcome these obstacles and this is no longer going to be a thing. And I said, well, there's your talk. So you have, here's the ordinary world. Here's what we all know. Here are the good, the bad, the problems, the struggles, the successes. But the way that you get into that second part is you have what screenwriters would call the inciting incident. So this can be a statement that your audience might disagree with, might be a question that you know they don't have the answer to. It might be an observation. You might actually tap into something that everyone in the room seems to be aware of, but maybe they don't know they're aware of, but something that's going to grab their attention. And that's where you disorient them. You spend really 50% of your talk then in this disorientation, telling them about, now that we know what's wrong, how are we going to address it? And then you give them a vision on the back end, the last 25% of the talk, of this is what your life could look like, your company could look like, your organization, if you implement this.
Give me an example of an inciting incident, statement or question, or something that kind of transitions them into that.
Yeah, you mentioned malaria, and you're right, I'm not a malaria expert. I actually talked a lot more about advocacy and policy. And so I would get up, and the talk that I gave around that was, malaria seems to be this forgotten disease. And so in our country and in most of the developed countries in the world, malaria is not a thing anymore. But then as I began to walk through why that is, I would really boil it down to the millions of people who still die every year. And I would say one of 2 things. I would talk about that the most dangerous animal in the world is a mosquito, which always kind of made people go, huh? Because we think, lions or sharks, or if you're really up on your animals, hippopotamuses are pretty dangerous. Or
hippopotamuses, they're so deadly.
Yeah.
They're so deadly.
Typically, though, the thing I would point out, because at that point my daughter was right in that age, I would say, and out of those who die, most of them are under the age of 5. And I think that we can actually create a world where every kid has the right to celebrate their 5th birthday. And what that did is people had agreement with that, because no one's going to disagree with it. And then I would say, and here's what we can do. So then I would spend the time walking through different realities around advocacy and policy. And then on the back end, I would finish with this idea of, what if kids all over the world knew that they could blow out the candles on their birthday cake on their 5th birthday. And so you start with the idea, most of us don't wake up thinking about malaria, not in the United States, not in Western Europe, but for the majority world, it is a real daily thing that impacts the GDP of countries, the families, the sickness, I mean, everything. And so that inciting incident of mosquitoes are the most dangerous animal in the world, or giving all the statistics, but then making it about a 5-year-old blowing out the candles on their birthday cake, those little things are what grab the attention. From there, then you can begin moving into that. Let's think together about what it would look like if this wasn't the case. And here's how it's going to happen.
Okay. Let me explore some things with you based on some ideas that I've come up with through my career of, presenting, whether it was as running a design firm, presenting the problem first. I would come up and say, hey, this is the data, this is the thing that we're working on, this is the problem, and kind of agitating that problem and trying to get people to feel the discomfort. And you've seen talks like this too, right? Where they set up this whole problem and get people just like into, oh my gosh, this is really uncomfortable. Oh, this is really bad. Oh, this like, this is like painful. And then the inciting incident is that switch. Is that what you're saying? Is kind of like this switch to flip people into, what if we could do this, or imagine where you could do this, and then start moving people into the solution. Is that kind of what you're talking about as far as orientation, disorientation? Is the orientation part like the problem part, or do you not really, buy into that whole model of like kicking up the dust and the problem stuff?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned film school. So let's, if you're listening and you're a parent of young kids, you've probably seen the movie Cars, right? With Lightning McQueen. So you think about the first part of that movie, you're introduced to this race car who's young, cocky, and incredibly good. And you're oriented to his world. Then you begin to see little cracks in it where he doesn't have friends. He doesn't have anyone he can call to go to the race. All he wants to do is win a piston cup. And you realize he's living a pretty shallow life. The inciting incident is the moment where he gets caught up in Radiator Springs and the sheriff says to him, you're in a heap of trouble. And all of a sudden you realize there's an inflection point. His life's going to change. And so when you walk into a room and you're a stranger, the job of the speaker in a lot of ways is to really close the gap between you and the audience. And so if you show up and you understand what is the ordinary world for the people sitting here. So whoever is I just gave an Easter sermon and I talked about doubting Thomas, and just the name Doubting Thomas suggests that, he's not really that great. And what I did is I gave permission from the platform to say, Thomas is the incredulous skeptic inside all of us. We all doubt. We all struggle to believe. And you could feel people going, oh man, this is okay. And then my pivot was into, why did people have such a difficult time recognizing Jesus? Like, it wasn't just Thomas, it was everybody. And that's wait a second, I'm not just like Thomas, I'm like everyone else in this story. So anytime you can get people, when you think about that inciting incident, think about it like a hook, where they're with you, they agree with you, they feel like, man, you know my world a little bit. Now you present something that the listener cannot necessarily solve. They don't know where you're going necessarily. You raise a question that they don't have an answer to. You make an observation that maybe they've made before, but they don't know what to do with what they're seeing. And once you can get them there, now you have them, because you really ask them in some ways to make a choice. But if you do it right, they don't have a choice about making a choice. They have to think about the question, the statement, the observation that you've made. So that's this, the orientation is 3 acts. 25% of your talk is that first part. Then you hit that inciting incident. 50% of the talk is really responding to the question, statement, observation you've made. then the last 25% is saying, and if we did this, now that we understand the problem better, what could life look like on the other side of it?
What has been the result of that journey? I'm going to talk about reactions in the moment. So short-term results and then long-term results from using this model.
Yeah, I think the short-term results is when people can walk out of the room and know what you just said, that is probably the result you're going for, making it memorable. And making it memorable is not necessarily wowing people with whether it's slides or, I know there's some people that use props and those things work. But what makes it memorable is you've told them a story. And so you think about any film that you've seen, within 48 hours, if people ask you what it's about, you can tell them. And if we structure a talk according to the structure of a story, people are going to remember it. And the reason that that's important is if you're providing a solution, if you're suggesting a product or a program, you want people to leave a conference or leave a gathering where they may have heard a lot of talks and say, I remember this one. And if they remember it, it's not just about, gaining leads or sales, but if you're really believing what you're talking about, which I think is a huge part of it, I think people need the authenticity. But if people can remember it, it is actually going to provide life change. And I mentioned Jack Mesereau and the orientation, disorientation, reorientation. He was an education professor, and he said, this is how we learn as adults. And so over time, learning is evidenced by a change in behavior. And so the immediate effect is they remember it. The long-term effect is that they're going to go and live differently, that they're going to move in the world differently because of what they've heard and what they've learned.
When you are preparing, do you have like a template that you're working off of? Like, do you have something that you're filling out along the way? Is there this framework, or is it just kind of this, you just understand orientation, disorientation, now you've done this for 25 years. But starting out, I don't know if you were using this and then all of a sudden you were using it and then saw the success. What's your process?
Yeah, I used to. What I did is I drew a straight line, a horizontal line across the paper. So I flipped the paper sideways so it was landscape. I would draw a straight line, and I would draw two vertical lines intersecting that horizontal line. And it would be really 25% on one side, the middle half would be 50%, then the back end would be the other 25. And on that first line, I would write above it inciting incident. And so I would think through, what do people need to know about whatever I'm speaking about? What are people already familiar with? And then I would try to figure out what's the problem here that I want to address specifically. And I would start just by writing that problem down. Then I would try to think about, is there a question? Is there an observation? Is there a statement? Whatever that is. And I would memorize that inciting incident, that statement, question, observation. And I would write that in. And then I would really, the bulk of my outline that I'd focus on would be that middle 50%. And then I would think about, on the back end, what does this mean? And there are times where I'll say things like, so we've heard, stats, we've heard this, we've heard that. What does this even mean for us here today? What are we going to leave and go do with this? And sometimes I'll make it that obvious that I'm transitioning to the latter half. And so that structure, writing it down and putting it on a piece of paper, sometimes I would write Act 1 under the line, that horizontal line, Act 2 and Act 3, just as a way of keeping myself structured, so that as I was working through the talk, I knew exactly where it was going. And now I can go back and you and I were talking a few weeks ago, Scott, and you said something about the Easter sermon. And I honestly didn't really remember exactly what I had said. So I went back and looked at it. I was like, oh yeah, there's the inciting incident. Here's the middle part. Here's the end. And it's something now, like you said, after 25 years, it's been second nature.
That's amazing. What's the biggest problem you see or hear when people are delivering the keynote?
Yeah, they get lost in the woods, and you can feel it in the room. It's almost like you see people going, what are they talking about? Because you're not keeping it on a thread. You're not keeping it on a through line. And one of the things that I do before I ever get to the structure is I boil everything down to one sentence. And the reason I do that is if someone says, oh, you're going to go talk about work-life balance, what are you going to say? And once I know what that sentence is, then everything that I say, every word that comes out of my mouth is going to serve that sentence. And that's where that through line is. And a lot of times we have a million good ideas and they don't all serve that one focal point of the entire talk. And so you might go on a tangent here and a tangent there. You might have a great story or really powerful information or stats. But if it's not serving that through line, you begin to lose people. And once you've lost the audience, reeling them back in is almost impossible.
So what's the takeaway? What today, like, what do you want people to do? What is the thing that everybody listening right now can go do?
Yeah. Well, if you have a keynote, what I would say is, can you boil that down to one sentence? And so don't say, hey, I have a talk about team collaboration. No. That's you're telling me what the subject is. Don't say I have a keynote about work-life balance or healthy leadership. All of those are subjects. I'm talking specifically. So the talk that I have on work-life balance is the only way to establish work-life balance is to create a rhythm, because rhythm is what introduces us to time. That's it. And so that one sentence. So I would say the actionable thing people can do if they're listening is, if you want to create a keynote, or if you have one, do you have that one sentence? And if you can get there, if you already have a keynote, then go back through it and ask yourself the question, is everything that is in this keynote serving that one major point that I am trying to make? And if it's not, get rid of the content. Even if it's good content, save it for another day. If you want to create a keynote and you have all sorts of ideas and notes that you've been taking over the years, find that one sentence. People often ask me, well, how do I know what the sentence is? Well, I would say make it something you're passionate about, or make it something that's actually shifted the way that you've worked and led and lived. Because underneath all of this, if you don't actually believe in what you're saying, the audience will sniff that out in 30 seconds.
Amen. And I'm not just saying that because you're, but it's the idea that believing that thing, and almost writing it for yourself. I hear a lot of authors will do that too, right? Is I'm writing this book for me. Like, I'm writing it for me as the audience, because really somebody else out there is probably having the same thoughts, same problems, same struggles as you. And if you can write it from that personal, vulnerable space, so many people will be able to connect with you. And I would almost throw this in, those first few minutes, engaging with a new audience. Now, as a pastor, you've had the luxury of, like, talking to the same people over and over and over again, but you'll have guests that'll come in and people that'll try out a new church. But as keynoters and people giving talks, you go in and there's a brand new audience. They have no idea who you are. And you've got to build trust and credibility in those moments. And if you do it by having a wall up or being scattered or not getting to the point or whatever it is, you're going to create some disconnect, and it's going to be tough after that. So I love what you said.
Yeah, being the expert doesn't carry the weight that it used to. People want to see someone who's authentic, like you use the word vulnerable, someone that they feel like I could probably go and invite them out for a cup of coffee after this and they'd say yes. That's what they want to see.
Exactly. Let me ask you real quick. What is a book, podcast, something, a speaker, somebody that you would reference that we should go check out, or that we should go listen to, or that we should go do?
Man, anytime someone asks me about a book, the first one that comes to mind is a novel by Chaim Potok called My Name is Asher Lev. It's a book about a kid who grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community, who was an artist and really followed his passion and his calling at great sacrifice to himself. And that it's my favorite body of work out there.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome. I've never heard of that. I will check that out.
It's incredible.
I mean, you sold that to me with passion and conviction. So thank you. Well done, sir. If there's any bit of hope or advice you want to give to those coaches, consultants out there who are struggling to either launch, build their business, or to, maybe go out there and expand on what they're doing, what's the word of hope from you?
Yeah, I would say work toward truly understanding what you bring to the world and pursue that. And I see it in myself. I see it in everyone, that we try to be something for someone else so we can take the next step in our career and our journey in our life. But what I really, truly, deeply believe is that all of us have been given something that we can uniquely offer the world. And when we can really not only identify that, but become content with it and confident with it, that's what people are going to be drawn to. And that's what the world actually needs.
Love it, Michael. That's why you're on the show, man. You bring it. You bring it. So grateful for you, man. Thank you for everything you've done. I look forward to hanging out with you more.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
And doing what we do. So keep spreading the good word.
Will do.
Thank you for joining me today on How They Do That. If you found this helpful, please rate the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You see, I help you, you help me. That's how it works. Oh, and please do not keep this to yourself. Share the show with a fellow coach who could also use these insights. Keep exploring, my friends. Never stop asking, how'd they do that? Because with every question, you get closer and closer to refining your business and scaling your impact.